secure their own future. So I am proud to work with my European partners, and I'm proud of what we can achieve. I stood on this platform only a year ago and said that Europe could recover its dynamism. I still believe we can, but only if we are bold, only if we fight for our prosperity, get to grips with our debt, take bold decisions on deregulation, on opening up the single market, on innovation, on trade, and address the fundamental issues at the heart of the Eurozone crisis. All these decisions, they lie in our own hands. They are the test of Europe's leaders in the months ahead. Yes, the stakes are high. They are incredibly high. But there's nothing about the current crisis that we don't understand. The problems we face are man-made, and with bold action and with real political will, we can fix them. Thank you. Thank you very much. Very happy to take some questions. I think there are some roving microphones, so fire away. If you could say who you are and where you're from. Right, question over here.
Robert Peston from the BBC. Prime Minister, in your view, what is the single most important thing the Eurozone could do to see a way through this crisis?
I think the single most important thing is to deal with what I call the short-term issues. There's short-term and there's long-term. Short-term has got to be Greece, banks and firewall. And if you do all of those three things together quickly and fundamentally, I think you'd ease the sense of crisis there is, accompanied by what the European Central Bank is already doing, and perhaps it could do even more. I think for 2012, that is what would make a clear difference in sentiment, in outlook, in a sense that the Eurozone leaders want to take the steps that will ease the short-term problems. But as I said in my speech, that doesn't really address some of the longer-term tensions at the heart of the single currency, which are about competitiveness and are about trade deficits as much as they're about budget deficits. And I think it's that part of the piece that needs further work and attention. And I think that's what Chancellor Merkel was talking about yesterday, and Christine Lagarde as well.
Excuse me, bankers here are telling me that they think the Eurozone is over the worst of the crisis. Do you think that's wishful thinking?
Well, I think that there's what's happening still at the moment in terms of the high bond yields in countries that are effectively going to hold back their growth and their participation in the European economy. That still, as I said out in my speech, it's a little bit better than it was at the end of last year, but it's still not fixed. And so you've got to fix, in my view, those short-term issues before you can go on and then deal with a longer-term problem. Look, why wasn't this problem, why didn't it manifest itself earlier? You could ask yourself. There have been many years of successful Eurozone operation. Well, of course, in those years, private sector financial flows, in many ways, were covering up for some of the deeper competitiveness problems. And so as those flows have dried up, unless they return, you're going to have to address some of the more fundamental problems at the heart of the Eurozone. Because, as I said, every other single currency has at least some of those features. And it seems to me logical that a successful single currency will have to adopt some of those if it's going to succeed in the long term. Gentleman here.
Jidesh Kadia from the United Kingdom. Prime Minister, there's been a lot of discussion in addition to the Eurozone this week about redefining and remodeling capitalism, and you recently made a speech on this subject. Are we on an inevitable path towards state capitalism?
No, I don't think we are. I mean, I think that those of us who believe in genuine market capitalism need to make the defense of our system against state capitalism. And I think absolutely at the heart of it is the rule of law. It's maybe an odd thing sometimes to advertise to international investors, but I always think it's quite a good tip to ask, how many times does the government lose a court case? Well, frustratingly in Britain, we seem to lose them all the time. But it's a very good test of, are you living in a genuinely free country where you can enforce your rights and your property rights and everything else? And I think the genuine open and free market economies, the European economies, have got to stand up and shout about their values of freedom and democracy and the rule of law, because those are actually some of the things that make us safe and great economies to invest in. So I don't think we should give up in this battle at all. I think the challenge for Europe, in a way, can be put quite simply, we've got the two faces of Europe. There's the face of Europe that people from the outside look at, that they admire still, which is the great values, the great democracy, the great rights, the fantastic culture. These are great strengths for Europe. But the second face at the moment is of economic stagnation, low growth, rising unemployment, lack of competitiveness. Now, we can change that. We shouldn't be pessimists about this. If we actually deregulate our economies, make them more competitive, keep our tax rates down, pay for our long-term healthcare and social needs, change the way our economies work, we can be a success story in the future. But we have to demonstrate the political will to do it. Then we can show both faces to the world, and then we can take on anybody, because we've got the culture, the rights, the democracy, the history, the brilliant European values, but we've also got the strong economy and the strong prospects for the future. But it's the second phase we've got to cope with this year. Gentleman over here in the middle with his hand up.
Kamenov, Bulgarian Cardiac Institute. What safeguards, Prime Minister, are you looking for the new treaty to return to negotiating table? And how are we going to deal with the competitiveness of periphery of Europe?
Well, on the issue of the treaty, as I said in my speech, look, it's quite clear to me that the Eurozone countries need to come together, do more things together, cooperate more together in order to make the single currency work. And my view is they can obviously do that inside the European Union if they want to, or they can do it outside the European Union. What matters as a country outside the Eurozone is that there are proper safeguards if they want to do it within the EU treaties. There weren't those safeguards, so they have to have the treaty on the outside. But I think people can overdo what happened in December. The real change in Europe came when some countries decided to form a Eurozone and to give up their countries and join the Euro. That was inevitably going to mean they were going to have to sit together, talk together, work together, because they've got one currency between them. Now, I don't think for 1 minute that this process disadvantages Britain. I think in many ways we've got the best of all worlds. We are in the European Union, major contributors to the European Union. We have a major say about the single market and the work of the European Union, but we're not in the Eurozone. And that gives us the flexibility to have our own interest rates, to run our own monetary policy. It means that right now we can combine the tough fiscal stance that we undoubtedly need, confirmed only yesterday by the IMF, who said there's no fiscal space in Britain for a further stimulus. We can combine that tight fiscal stance with what I would call quite a radical monetary policy, where interest rates are low, but we're also working on credit easing and trying to get credit directly into banks and businesses to get our economy moving. I don't think this disadvantages Britain at all. I think it's the right way to engage in Europe, and where we have strong partners and strong agreements on things like the single market and competitiveness, we fight very hard. We have lots of allies. So on some occasions, we don't want to be in part of what Europe's doing. The Schengen No Borders Agreement is another example. Many countries in Europe want to tear down their borders, have complete free movement. That's their decision. Britain thinks it's right to keep borders because there is an opportunity to deal with drugs and guns and some of the other issues. So we're not in that part of the European Union. That's not to our disadvantage, that's to our advantage. Who's next? We need a bit of gender balance here. There we are, over here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Yasmin Shehata from Egypt. My question is about the UK's leadership in foreign policy. What, if anything, is the UK doing to ensure a smooth transition to democracy in Egypt?
Right. Well, I think this is a huge challenge. I mean, I'm still an optimist about the Arab Spring. I still think that that region of our world having the chance to throw off quite corrupt autocratic regimes and have the chance of democracy and a say in how they're governed is still a huge net positive for that part of the world, but also, frankly, for us as well, which is why I'm so proud in what we did in Libya and also the help that we've given in Egypt. I think the issue in Egypt is trying to get the transition right. I think that the military powers that be have to do more to show people that they want a functioning democracy. And I think they need to take further steps in that direction. I think in Europe, we have a responsibility. We're major trading partners, we're major investors into Egypt. I think for too long, the neighborhood program in Europe wasn't very conditional, it wasn't very active, it wasn't very robust, and we're changing that to make sure that the way Europe engages with Egypt, with Tunisia, with Morocco, with Libya, is far more positive and far more about trying to promote democracy and plurality and the building blocks of democracy that will give people in Egypt that chance of success. I think Egypt is absolutely key because of its size and scale. If the Egyptian people can demonstrate that they're on a path towards a form of successful democracy, as we have in Turkey, for instance, I think that will do enormous amounts for that region. But we shouldn't look away from what's happening in Tunisia and Libya, both smaller countries, potentially both quite wealthy countries. I think they can also show a sort of guidelight to other countries that want to make the move from autocracy to democracy. I think we've got room for one more, and then we've got a special treat for everybody. Gentleman here.
Mr. Prime Minister, what's your message for the Palestinians and the Israelites people?
Right. Well, my message to the Palestinians and the Israelis is please keep talking. We had the talks in Jordan the start of this year, and the truth of this matter is it doesn't matter what happens at the United Nations, it doesn't matter what resolutions we pass in the House of Commons or even here at the World Economic Forum. This can only happen. The two-state solution of a secure Israel next to a new state of Palestine can only happen through a negotiation of those two parties sitting around the table. As President Obama has said on one or two occasions, we can't want it more than they want it. Now, it's clearly in both their interests for those talks to go ahead and succeed. And I would say, as I did say to Bibi Netanyahu earlier this week, you've got to show some confidence-building measures to show the Palestinians you're serious about getting a deal. And I said to President Abbas earlier this year, don't add too many preconditions before you go into talks, because you've got to do the negotiation round the table rather than before you get there. Now, if both sides can give up a little, can actually show they want to deal, they want to agree, I think we all know roughly what most of those end-state solutions are. As Shimon Peres has put it many times, and I think here in Davos, sometimes he feels that there's a light, but there's no tunnel. And we need to get the tunnel right in terms of the talks process so we can get to the end point we all want to achieve. Can I thank Professor Schwab again for inviting me to address you today. Can I ask two people to come on stage just briefly? This year, as you know, 2012, is the year the Olympics are coming back to Britain and coming to London. And I've got two very important people I'd like you to give a warm welcome to. The Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, and Sebastian Coe. Boris.